So hi everyone, and welcome to another Regenerative Finance Lab in the Design School. I'm thinking of changing the name of this series because how many people think it's just about money and think they don't know anything about it and then don't attend, when actually all of you who come to these sessions know that this is probably one of the most practical applied spaces in the design school alongside the inner space, which Penny hosts, which is also very applied and very, very practical because we explore real world case studies. And today we're going to talk about what I titled somewhat seriously and somewhat playfully, Early Steps Toward Regenerating the Amazon River, because what we're going to talk about today is, in a certain sense, the logic. What is the logic of regenerating the Amazon River? And I think what you're going to notice is how the logic I'm about to share is pretty much completely absent from all of the activism around protecting the Amazon rainforest, which is to say, people who actually know how to do watershed restoration, they have a couple of really basic insights. For example, you always start at the top of the watershed. Or if you're on a piece of land, you start at the top of the property, at the highest elevation point. And so if we're going to regenerate the Amazon River, maybe we should start at the top. Something as basic as that is pretty much non-existent from the discourse about the Amazon River, because honestly, no one's talking about regenerating the Amazon River. What they're talking about is stopping the bleeding. Like, can we please stop the deforestation? Instead of, well, what would it mean to regenerate it? What would that actually mean? And so what we're going to do today is talk about that big picture question in the context of, really, there are two places that Penny and I are starting to work actively, but we've only really begun with one of them so far. So we're going to be talking about one, which is that we're starting to collaborate in two of the sacred headwaters of the Amazon rainforest. One is the largest tributary of the Amazon River system. After the Amazon River itself, the second largest river system is the river system of the Caquetá River, which starts in Florencia, where Penny and I were last week. And so we're going to be talking about the headwaters of the Caquetá River. And then the other river system that comes out of Colombia that's of a substantial scale is the Putumayo watershed, which has several sub-drainages that drain into it, but the Putumayo River also drains into the main line of the Amazon River, very close to where the Caquetá River enters into the Amazon. Now, they both enter into the Amazon in Brazil, but they both start in the northern Andes of Colombia. And so that's one of our lessons, is that we need to see where things begin. And so what I want to do today is walk you through that logic and show you some of these structures that are in place. If you've seen a lot of my previous webinars from the Finance Lab, there'll be a couple of familiar slides, because I'm going to review the Northern Andes Regeneration Fund and a little bit about the movement of territorial foundations to give us a sense of why we're able to take these actions. And then we're going to explore how the Northern Andes Regeneration Fund came alive 6 days ago. Last Saturday, there was a gathering of people from a mapping of a multi-stakeholder network to convene them and begin implementing the Northern Andes Regeneration Fund in the city of Florencia, in the headwaters of the Caquetá River. And I was a co-facilitator and a presenter there, and Penny and I met several of the local regenerative projects that were there in a very brief way, because we were technically on vacation with Elise with us. But we had 2 intense days of field site visits, followed by a day-long activation of the Northern Andes Fund in the Caquetá region. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today in this larger context. So what I want to do now is just jump into the presentation so that I can enliven us with discussion. And what I want to really emphasize when we go through this presentation is you're going to sort of see 3 levels. So I want you to notice them. The first level is the planetary level, that you can't do something like regenerate the Amazon basin without understanding its Earth system's dimensions. The second is that you have to start somewhere. So where do you begin? And anyone who does watershed restoration will tell you, begin at the highest point of elevation. So we begin at the headwaters. And then the third thing that we're going to notice is what is happening on the ground that is incredibly rich, incredibly complex, and doesn't look very much like watershed restoration. So how do they fit together? How do you discover the real regenerative capacities within human culture? Because I'm going to give you a little heads up. The Caquetá region is where the FARC was invented, where most of the most extreme violence of narco trafficking and cocaine trade in Colombia started, and where even to this day, there are red zones that are extremely violent, and there is a lot of trauma. So not exactly where you would think of beginning to regenerate the Amazon rainforest. But you're going to see today some of the richness of that context. And as much as I could learn about it in 3 days, so I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on Caquetá and its history, but just from the people we met, you're going to get a flavor of it. And the flavor of it is incredibly deep. Like one of the phrases I learned from an Indigenous woman at the gathering on Saturday was, not only do we need ancestral knowledge, we need ancestral knowledge from millennial cultures, is the wording she used, which is Indigenous cultures that have at least a 1,000-year long history, at least. And the Indigenous people here, probably 13 or 14,000 years old. And so they have wisdom that you almost can't imagine the depth of. And so, and they still exist with intact cultures in the midst of all this violence. So that's your preview. And now I want to do is give a presentation. It'll probably take 25 minutes. And then like always, there'll be plenty of time for discussion afterwards. And so let's get started. Okay, here we go. So, oops, I'm on the wrong slide. I'll be on this slide. There we go. So the title of today's presentation is Early Steps Toward Regenerating the Amazon Basin. I've already explained that pretty well. So let's just jump in. What does it really mean to regenerate the Amazon River? This entire kind of light blue area in the middle, that is the 200 watersheds that comprise the Amazon Basin. There are 199 rivers approximately that drain into the Amazon, the 200th river. So there are 200 rivers in the Amazon Basin. It's one of the largest hydrological systems on Earth. For comparison, it's approximately the same amount of water in all 5 of the Great Lakes in North America. The Great Lakes have very slightly more water than the Amazon Basin because the Great Lakes have 21% of the world's fresh water. The Amazon Basin has 20% of the world's fresh water. So this system is one of the most important hydrological systems on Earth. So what does it mean to regenerate the Amazon River? Well, recalling that regeneration is a process of living systems, we need to understand, how is the Amazon Basin born? Where does it get its life from? And the answer to that requires us to think like a planet. So this is the part where we think at the planetary scale. So where does the water come from to create a rainforest at continental scales? You can see there in South America, now it's more of a dark blue purple color, is this massive Amazon system. Where does that water come from? Well, just to give you a very brief lesson on atmospheric dynamics, I'm going to talk about something that's happening right now. Because this is what's called the sea surface temperature anomaly, which is a way of saying how much does the temperature of the surface of the ocean diverge from its background average. And what you can see is in the northern parts of the Pacific, because that's Asia over there on the left, in the northern parts of the Pacific, all the way between Asia and North America, is the hottest and most intense El Nino pattern ever recorded in history. So in the last 400 years of observations, we have never seen an El Nino pattern this strong. And this is from last week. This pattern right here is why about 80 children died in a flood in Texas. This right here is why an avalanche took out 80 homes last weekend in Putumayo, because of the extensive amount of rain that's happening in the northern Andes. This pattern right here is what is driving the amount of rainfall in North and South America right now. So how does it work? Well, it works like this. I'm not going to go into all the details, but you see that thick line of clouds running from east to west that basically runs into the northern tip of South America? That denser stretch of clouds is a region of the Earth called the Intertropical Convergence Zone. It is created by the Coriolis force, which means it's created by the rotational inertia of the Earth. As the Earth spins around, the atmosphere is a fluid, and the fluid dynamics create rotational energy, which causes the jet streams and the storm tracks. And right along the equator is a region called the Intertropical Convergence Zone, where the rotation away from the equator in the north and the rotation of air away from the equator in the south creates the major mid-latitude weather systems, leaving this very strong concentration of rain formation as a weather band that gives us the tropics. And that intertropical convergence zone, look what it runs directly into. It smashes into the northern Andes. So the reason the Caquetá River is so big is because there's this huge atmospheric river of clouds and rain that are directed to exactly the place in the northern Andes where the Caquetá River begins. So a large volume of water for all of the Amazon basin is formed from El Nino, La Nina, and the Intertropical Convergence Zone. So the regeneration of the Amazon depends on the regenerative patterns of the world climate system and the sea surface temperature anomalies of the Pacific Ocean, or more specifically, the El Nino La Nina pattern, which is also technically called the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, except it's no longer a 20-year cycle. Now it's about a 6-month cycle thanks to global warming. So I just want you to notice that the regeneration of the Amazon depends on knowing where the water comes from. And the water comes from an ocean-atmosphere relationship to bring massive amounts of water to the South American continent. And look, this is something else we need to know. If we want to regenerate the Amazon, we need to know, how does the life system of the Amazon basin work? Each of these different numbered and colored areas is a major watershed of the Amazon basin. So what you can see is that one in the upper left that has number 6, that's the Caquetá River. The one right below it, number 5, that's the bright green, that is Putumayo. And you can see that Putumayo watershed and Caquetá watershed both begin in Colombia. There are a couple of other watersheds that begin in Colombia, but these are 2 really big ones. And so when we're talking about regeneration of a hydrological system starts at the highest point, well, the highest point turns out to be the Andes. And so the northern Andes, and that the combination of this massive flow of moisture right into the northern Andes, together with where they arrive with the Caquetá watershed, which means Florencia is a highly strategic acupuncture point for the entire Amazon basin. And here you can see the 2 watersheds colored in. On the left, that purple line is the Caquetá River, and on the right is the Putumayo River. So you can see a little bit more of the structure of how the drainage basin creates rivers and how those rivers come into the main channel of the Amazon River system. So just to give you a sense of the scale of what we're talking about, this is not only continental, this is about half of the horizontal width of the equator. The Pacific Ocean together with South America is what gives us the Amazon basin. So how would we work with something like that? And this is a bit of a review. It's a slide I put together back in January, where we talked about creating a bioregional funding ecosystem in the Northern Andes. And the way it all began, interestingly, was the creation of the Barichara Regeneration Fund. I started raising money to purchase a piece of land called Origen del Agua. It's now a nature reserve that we're still doing awesome things with. And then I had a little bit of extra money, so I invited local regenerative processes to collaborate. We began flowing resources into a tapestry of regenerative initiatives in Barichara. We were invited into a process of learning about territorial foundations. So over a period of about 3 years, we created Fundación Barichara Regenerativa. which was legally constituted in the beginning of 2024. But, and we then created, through this process, these different thematic areas of community funds: a regenerative education fund, a regenerative economy fund, an ecosystem restoration fund, and a territorial healing fund. But we were participating in the creation of a movement of territorial foundations the entire time, where now there are about 10 territories in Colombia that either legally constituted a territorial foundation or are in the process. And because we created all this structure explicitly based on regeneration of our territory and a bioregional framework, we were able to bring the structure of Barichara Regenerativa to the Northern Andes Fund. So we created the Northern Andes Regeneration Fund by replicating the administrative structure of Barichara Regenerativa into a fund that is currently a collaboration between 7 territories. Barichara is one of those territories. So you can see this growth process of a way of organizing for bioregional regeneration at the scale of the Northern Andes and at the scale of our 500,000 hectares of land in the surrounding territory of Barichara. The 7 territories that have legally constituted a foundation are on this map. You see the 2 bottom ones are Florencia and Putumayo, which are in the watersheds of the Amazon basin. The Barichara one is the upper one on the right next to Lord Bucaramanga. And you can just see where they all are. They're all anchored within the Northern Andes. So we have these 7 different territories where there's a local team, and all of them are now, this year, are in the process of adopting a bioregional regeneration framework through the Northern Andes Fund, and then applying it down into their local territories by replicating what we're doing in Barichara. So we have Barichara Regenerativa, which is the one that we created here. Paisano, which is based in Bogota. Sembrando Paz, which is in a tropical dry forest region called Montes de Maria on the Caribbean coast. Fundación Florencia Vida Agua y Paz, which is the one we're going to talk about in a moment. That's the group that invited us to Florencia. Putumayo Florece, which is the group in Putumayo. Funimos, which is in Medellin and the surrounding area in the Abura Valley. And Creamos, which is in the Cauca Valley in El Tambo, which is sort of close to Cali in the southwestern part of the country. And so these 7 regions have a territorial foundation, and they are representative and voting members in the governance of the Northern Andes Fund. So we have now created a shared framework of bioregional regeneration and tracking systems for distribution across these 7 different territories through the Northern Andes Regeneration Fund. But now they have to implement it. We created the structures, it hasn't been implemented. So it looks like this. We invite financial flows into the Northern Andes Regeneration Fund. We distribute this funding to a network of territorial foundations who are organizing their territories through the fund as holistic hydrological systems. And then we arrive into local action networks, which is networks of local actors doing regenerative work, where regenerative practices take place on the ground. And then we share stories out to the world to mobilize more resources. And this is why the Northern Andes Regeneration Fund is connected to the Earth Regeneration Fund and the Design School, and the work we're doing here is this storytelling and mobilization of resources and learning together. These are all things we do through the Design School for Regenerating Earth. And the host organization is a foundation based in Bogota called Territoria. And we created this, notice it says Fondo Bioregional de Regeneración Norteandino. So if you go to the website of this, you will see there's a section that explains what it means to be a bioregion and what it means to be regenerative and how that is explicitly designed into this Northern Andes Fund. Because we brought what we're doing in Barichara, which, by the way, what we're doing in Barichara is what we're teaching in the Design School in our learning journeys, and how others around the world are learning it. We also brought it to the 6 other territories in Colombia, and we're now in the process of implementing it. That's why Penny and I are invited to travel to these places. And so this is the process for the Northern Andes Fund. Starting in January of 2024, about a year and a half ago, we had a gathering of territorial foundations for Colombia that was in Putumayo. I suggested that we create a Northern Andes Fund, and everyone loved the idea. So we created it. We had a strategy session in Bogota about a month later. We outlined the design principles for how the fund would work. I went out and found a foundation in North America to donate a $150,000 grant into the fund. We leveraged that funding into a series of workshops to create governance and operating structures, as well as to support on-the-ground regenerative work in 3 of the 7 territories. And then there was a gathering of territorial foundations in the headwaters of the Bogota River in March of 2025, where the movement of territorial foundations officially adopted the governance structures in the Northern Andes Fund was born. So in March of this year, the Northern Andes Fund was officially born. And there are things we said, that there were these 5 collective construction workshops to answer the fund's main questions about its principles and values, what its thematic North Star is, what it means to be a bioregional approach, how we would engage in resource management, monitoring, and a learning ecosystem. All of this was developed in that 6-month period. There were 6 sessions of co-creation based on experience of pilot work in 3 territorial foundations, which were Putumayo, Barichara, and Bogota, where the fund's operational axes were built to see who are the fund members, what are their rights, what are their responsibilities, and what are the operational structures of the fund. And then we had an in-person meeting to approve all of this. So basically a huge amount of work happened last fall into this spring, and now we're entering a new phase. So with a shared understanding of bioregional regeneration, we started creating a monitoring system across diverse local efforts. One of the things we did was we required the 7 territories to do a mapping exercise. We said, go and look in your territory, who are the people that you are affiliated with that are doing ecosystem restoration? Who are the people who are doing territorial healing? Who are the people building regenerative economies? Who are the people doing regenerative education? And in the first pass, we identified 284 regenerative initiatives spread across the 7 territories. So in each of the 7 territories, there were a different number. Like in Barichara, we identified 45. In Florencia, they identified 29. In Bogota, they identified more because it's this huge urban population. And so we identified 284 in total spread across 7 territories, which means we were ready to create a framework for the $300,000 that's entering the Northern Andes Fund in about 2 weeks, so we can know how to deploy it. So you see, Colombia has these departments. These are their versions of states or provinces. And you can see that the departments of Colombia are organized as watersheds. Notice that Putumayo and Caquetá are both watershed design, and they drain into Amazonia, which is where those 2 watersheds come together, and they both enter into Brazil. And so the departments are almost bioregional because they're almost completely watershed structures or mountain range structures. So the idea is that the continent is already divided into watersheds, and Colombia's organizing structures are largely organized around watersheds. So we're organizing with the territories of Colombia in the same way. That's the idea. Pretty simple, right? And we're organizing around regenerative education, economy, ecosystem restoration, land use change, and territorial healing, which are the thematic areas that we're working with. So we arrived in Florencia. There's Florencia in the upper left, so you can see what it looks like relative to the Amazon basin. If you zoom in a little bit, you'll notice 2 things. There are several squiggly lines coming out of the area around Florencia. I think there are 10 major rivers that are born within 10 kilometers of Florencia. It's astonishing how much water there is there. It's kind of embarrassing. It's like Southern Ontario. You can't imagine how many rivers are born in the Oak Ridges Moraine. The answer is 67. Well, here there are like 10 major rivers born within a very small area because of that intertropical convergence zone I mentioned. And so there's Florencia. But then the other thing you should notice is not just the squiggly lines, but notice the dark color versus the light color. That basically from Florencia, for something like, I don't know, 150, 200 miles, they've basically deforested all of the tropical rainforest because the major industries of Caquetá and Putumayo, the primary industry is cattle grazing. And number 2 is the rubber trade, and rubber comes from a tree, which means both of them are deforestation. So the problem of regenerating the Amazon in Brazil with cattle grazing is represented in Colombia as well. So we were invited by Fundación Territorial Florencia, Vida, Agua y Paz, which is life, water, and peace. And what they say is vida en cada gota, which means life in every drop, paz en cada acción, peace in every action. So water or life in every drop and peace in every action. And because of the profound violence of Florencia and its territory, peace building is huge. Now you notice in this lower picture that my daughter's there because we're supposedly on a family vacation. So you see Penny and me there with my daughter Elise. In the front right bottom is Belian. She is one of the co-founders of the Territory Foundation and a total powerhouse. She's a psychologist. She teaches environmental psychology and deep ecology at the University of the Amazon. Directly behind her in that plaid shirt is her husband, Dario, who's also a member of the foundation, and he works in agriculture and sustainable food systems. And in the back left in that black jacket is Miller. Miller is an agroecologist helping people to do regenerative agroforestry practices in the territory. And they took us to Rio Hacha, the Hacha River, which is where this waterfall is draining into, and where Elise and Penny got to see wild monkeys. Penny got to see them for the first time ever. And so I want to briefly go into family slideshow mode. When we arrived in Florencia, it was late at night, but almost like half of the members of the Territorial Foundation came to greet us. We took this photo out in the street at the airport. It's a tiny little airport. You can see that I'm hiding behind a balloon because Elise is really happy they gave her balloons. And so we arrived. See, it is Florencia, Vida, Agua y Paz, life, water, and peace. And the first thing they did the next day is they took us to visit the Hacha River. So we went and saw waterfalls, these incredible rivers, and the lowest elevation cloud forest on Earth. You just can't believe the biodiversity of this place. All of you have ever been to places with high biodiversity. This is one of those places. This is a biodiversity hotspot. Cloud forest transitioning into rainforest with jaguars and with indigenous cultures and with toucans and with the great red macaw and with monkeys and all of it. It's like, it's just amazing. The natural wildlife here is incredible. So we went to see the Hacha River, which is the water supply for the 200,000 inhabitants of the city of Florencia. And then we went and visited the local turtles, see the kinds of fish that grow in the rivers. That statue on the left is a statue of a fish that grows to be about 2 meters long, like 6 feet. I actually ate some of it at a restaurant once. It was really delicious. That's one of those famous, giant river fish of the Amazon basin. There are beautiful flowers. There's indigenous cultures. It's just astonishing, the richness of this place. And so our first day was more learning about the landscapes and culture in a broad sense by going to visit sites of cultural significance. We went to a museum of indigenous artifacts. We went to see wildlife. We visited several rivers. We saw how river boat transport is a major form of transport in this area because there are long, wide, large rivers that ferry boats can travel on, and other things that are really distinctive about this region. You can literally take a boat from Florencia to the Atlantic Ocean through Brazil on this river system, which is probably about a 4,000-mile ride as the river flows. And when we went to the Indigenous Museum, I saw these 2 paintings and I took pictures of them. And I just want to explain their significance a little bit. So on the left, you see this naked woman underground, surrounded by skeletons, coming out of the dark and reaching her hand up out of the ground, and from her finger is growing green new life. This woman represents the indigenous peoples, and especially the wisdom practices of indigenous women, and what happened to them during the violence and colonization of the many invasions of the Caquetá region. What you can see is that you can drown, you can bury, you can kill, you can silence, but you cannot make the voices of the indigenous women go away. And so what this painting signifies for me, and why I took a picture of it, was not the innocence. It was the profound resilience, the incredible depths of strength and survival for thousands of years of the indigenous women and the knowledge holders, the guardians of Yahe or ayahuasca, the guardians of the coca plant, which is a sacred plant, the plant that's used in a bastardized industrial process to make cocaine is the coca plant. The mambeos, the guardians of indigenous healing and peace building practices, are held in the circles of women and through the shamanic men, who of course are raised and taught by the shamanic women. And so the role of women is huge. And what you can see is this woman was silenced, but you could not stop her impulse to reach through the death and destruction and hold true to the continuation of life. And we're going to see an example of that with the women who are still looking for their dead sons. We're going to talk about in a moment. So this painting on the left for me signifies the profound strength of the indigenous people who are still there, fully intact, in a place of incredible violence. And on the right, just look at that Colombian flag with the face of death looking over the malokas, the ceremonial houses and the traditional villages of the indigenous people, with this shroud of death. That represents the FARC, the paramilitaries, the mafias, the violence that stole their sons and caused their sons to kill each other in dynamics of power. And yet the village is still there because it's part of the territory and it can't be killed. The strength of these people, by the way, these two paintings are in a Catholic seminary with a museum of artifacts for indigenous people. So the positive relationship between the Catholic Church and indigenous people is very unusual in Florencia, very unusual. That paintings like this would be in a Catholic church in a seminary should tell you something about the depth of respect that the local missionaries have, which is not the case in a lot of Colombia. And I'm sure is not the case for all of the history in this region. But today, the Catholic Church works very closely with the indigenous people and vice versa, because the people, for all of the violence they've went through, spirituality is front and center everywhere in the culture in Florencia. You can't avoid the spirituality of these people. That's why I wanted to start with this powerful image. So when we started meeting some of the local groups, the first place we went was a place called Fazenda de Esperanza, which is actually an organization that started 43 years ago in Brazil by a Catholic priest who went to a small village and wasn't having very much success in his church because on the street corner was a group of drug dealers and drug addicts, and he had to walk past them every day or ride his bike past them every day. So he eventually just stopped and talked to them. And he realized that his mission would be to create a life pathway for people to exit a life of drug addiction. So 43 years ago, he created an organization in Brazil called Fazenda de Esperanza that has now been replicated in 30 other countries. There's only one location in Colombia where a fazenda exists, and it's this one in Florencia. And we went there to meet these young men. Well, some of them aren't so young, men of all ages. The youngest man here was 19, the oldest was about 65. And they're all men who have experienced great violence. Some of them have enacted violence and killed people. All of them were severe addicts of crack and cocaine addiction. And what the Fazenda is a 12-month process of constructing a shared living support system for these men to get job training and enter the job market and be able to work and have livelihoods so that they don't fall back into a life of drugs and crime. Now, for me, this is a deep pattern of cultural regeneration, because these men are victims of the violence. They're victims of colonization, and they are now empowered agents of healing and transformation to create livelihoods for themselves and to integrate themselves into the community. So while drug addiction may not seem like it's connected to restoring the rivers and the forests, this is a big part of how we end the drug trade. So these are men. Most of these men are actually from Bogota or from other parts of Colombia. They have come to Florencia, but the purpose is for them to grow their own food or to work and make enough money to buy their own food while they're going through a rehabilitation process which, by the way, has three pillars. Pillar number one is work. They have to work to provide their own food. Two is conviviality or co-living. They have to live together in community and build social relationships and support each other. And number three is spirituality. They have to cultivate something deeper and larger than themselves, because if you've never been addicted to crack, let me tell you, it is fucking hard to leave that. It is a spiritual journey. So this is some of the hardest rehabilitation work, and this is one of the best programs on the planet for doing it, which is why it's been replicated in 30 countries. And I see it as part of the antidote to the drug trade and a big part of the spiritual regeneration of the people of Caquetá. After this, we went to meet with the Association of Mujeres Buscadoras del Caquetá. What that means in English is women who are looking. These are women who each of them have lost men in their lives, men and boys, which you can see in the photos on the bottom left, and they're looking for their dead. They're looking for their disappeared. Most of these are women who lost their sons to violence, but the sons were never found. They don't know if they're alive or dead. One of these women, the woman sitting, there's a woman in the purple shirt on the right, the woman just to your left, not to her right, sitting there with her hands clasped together. She has been looking for her son for 26 years. So this is a group of women. They hold a grieving process you almost can't imagine. And their faith is not that they will find their sons, although that is what they hold. Their faith is that their refusal to stop looking is more powerful. It's more powerful than the violence. So normally you wouldn't think of women looking for their sons as regenerators. These women hold a grief collectively for thousands and thousands of people. And they write things. They write things that, like these artifacts they made, these are hand woven books that declare their undying devotion to their sons and their husbands and their nephews and their husbands who are lost. They sell them to make money to support themselves because they're in a place of pretty extreme poverty. And they come together and support each other because the people who are left behind after the violence are the women. Because most of the violence is between the men. And so the women hold the empty place where the men were. So I want to share this with you to say that this is an example of regeneration that is so spiritual that you have to be with these women to just feel their presence, to sense the depth of their devotion. And so when we met these women, we're like, these are regenerators. These are serious regenerators, so appropriate to the context of their territory. And then we met other locals. We went to a restaurant for lunch that was in the middle of the rainforest, and Elise got to meet a whole bunch of really cute local monkeys. There are 3 native species of monkeys, and this is one of them. And just to say that we got to be present to some of that diversity, and just look how beautiful it is. These incredible beings, I mean, they're mischievous little punks. Their equivalent in North America would be of raccoons. For anyone who knows how raccoons will like get into your trash can and make a mess and break into things. And these guys are little mischievous devils, but they sure are cute. And they're also a very, very important part of this ecosystem. There's Elise feeding dried or plantain or platano to the monkeys. And just to say that the human culture is so immersed in this natural biodiversity that you can't separate it here. It just can't be separated. Yeah. And while we were here, Penny started sharing some of her healing work because it was so present. Here's a woman named Gina who is asking Penny to talk into an automatic translator because Gina felt like Penny could explain things better in English, and Gina doesn't speak English. There's someone who is unmuted and who is making noise. August, it might be yours. You could mute yourself, please. Thank you. And so this is just an example of women coming together because of healing practices and how easy it was for this to happen. So Penny found a natural home for her life's work of healing, trauma healing work, which is very welcome in a place like this. Then in the afternoon of that, this is our day of meeting all the families and all the different communities. We met this collective of women who are doing watershed restoration, setting up recycling programs. They have a clothing production, like the textiles company. They grow and make food for each other. They have farms with like selling chicken eggs and other things. Some of them are cooks. And these are landless, mostly landless women, which is women who do not have land to do regenerative work on. So they come together and restore the watershed. And they support each other to have livelihoods. So this is one of the women's collectives. And there's Bailey Ann on the right, the woman from the Territorial Foundation, talking with the group of women. And then we went to this place that was basically a set of ramshack slums, and went to a place where they're so poor they don't have any schools, because basically the local government is so corrupt that no money goes to anything. So there's no money for schools. There was an abandoned building, and there's this woman that's down there on the right. Her name's Nancy. She found this abandoned building, raised enough money to put a roof on it, created a school. This is what the school looks like. She found someone to donate a bunch of old desks from a garbage dump. And now she's got a ramshack school with 35 students who call themselves Guardians of the Planet because they're restoring the health of the river. By the way, she's been sending me messages. I'm sitting here talking to you because we're exploring collaborations between our project of Sueños del Bosque and Barichara. And look at these kids. They have almost nothing. But if you had been there to feel their energy, when the teacher says, "What are we?" and they all go, "Guardians of the Planet." They started clapping and they stand up and yell and they're so excited. These kids are just so beautiful. They're so beautiful. And they are literally the protectors of their watershed. I'm going to go ahead and, because I should have given someone else permission, let me go and just mute everyone because of the background noise. There we go. That'll be better. All right, back to the show. So, continuing on. This is what Florencia looks like from the 6th floor of a building at the University of the Amazon, where we had our gathering on the Saturday. So you can just get a sense. It's about 200,000 people that live in the city. They're nested in the mountains. What you see in the distance there in the center, that is the lowest elevation cloud forest on Earth and the birthplace of the Acha River. So just to give you a little feel, and yes, it did rain a lot that day. And Penny and I were delayed. Penny and Elise and I were delayed getting back because of the rain. There's a lot of rain from the El Nino that's happening now. Okay, so on the day of this gathering, where they had done this social mapping of regenerative processes and initiatives for the Northern Andes Regeneration Fund, and then they had a gathering of them. Here on the left, this scroll is the manifesto of the Movement of Territorial Foundations. It was placed in the middle of an indigenous mandala that was part of the gathering of the group that met that day. And the members of the foundation came together and shared what is regeneration. They had me explain regeneration and bioregionalism. We talked about the Northern Andes Fund. We talked about the different regenerative processes and the budget of funding they had and the participatory way that they were going to distribute the money to the people who came to this event. And look, they organized in the 4 themes of the Northern Andes Fund: regenerative economy, regeneration of the natural ecosystems, regenerative education, and regenerative culture. And they organized in the 7 districts surrounding the city of Florencia, which is what you see on the right. So they were using 7 different watersheds associated with the city of Florencia as an organizing pattern for how they would look at regenerative processes through the lens of these 4 thematic areas that we created in Barichara and brought to the Northern Andes Fund. We engaged in artistic activities. We basically created clay models of different artifacts that represent the regenerative processes. I was working with a priest and someone who works at the Catholic Church but works in the prison system. So he asked me to make broken hearts. So I made these hearts with arrows through them for the artwork of the district that we were doing, to say they are healing broken hearts of the broken men who are in the prison system. But everyone was doing their part. This young man in the center of the picture on the right with that pink shirt, he's a rapper, a pretty damn amazing rapper. He actually improvised some rap songs for us about regeneration, bioregionalism, and Florencia. It's pretty awesome. So the arts were very well represented, is what I'll say. And the indigenous people were very well represented. So one of the things that Penny and I noticed was in the morning, they had a Catholic priest come and speak about the role of the Catholic Church. And then they had an indigenous shaman, who's this man you see on the left, come and speak to open the circle. And at the end of the day, the priest had to leave. So we closed the day with the indigenous man, which he spoke in his native language and then translated into Spanish. And you could just feel the depth of wisdom. This is a Mambeo. This is a person who brings people through medicine practices, who guides people through ayahuasca ceremony, and who is connected to the deep peace-building processes of the indigenous peoples. And the presence of these indigenous people, like basically look at the participants. Can you tell who's indigenous and who isn't? The answer is no, you can't. Because they're so blended. Which part is Spanish? Which part is indigenous is largely irrelevant in this group of people. Although there are some who are much more indigenous, like a shamanic person who's actually been trained by their community versus someone who's just connected with it. But the presence of this spirituality was completely pervasive. These are all of the members of the Territorial Foundation. You see they're a big group of people. They have 12 members of their foundation. And notice a pattern I've named before. They're about 80% women. That's what I find to be typical in regenerative leadership, is that real regenerative community leadership tends to be about 80% women. They don't need to go and meet their diversity quotas. It's that there are very important men who participate, but the majority are women. And this is very typical. Women who are older, women who are younger. And this group of people is pretty phenomenal. Penny and I fell in love with them while we were there. I knew some of them from my previous work with the Territorial Foundations, and about half of them I was meeting for the first time. So you can see that as we came together in this landscape system with a shared understanding of bioregional regeneration, and we'd already started creating a monitoring system across diverse local efforts with the different community funds that you see on the right, and what is connecting us? The rivers. This is a photo I took of one of the rivers next to the airport as we were taking off on last Sunday. And the rivers connect us all. So what does it mean to regenerate the Amazon River? First, we need to think like a planet. Then we need to understand how to structure human relationships across territories. But then we begin at the highest point of the watershed, and we work with the cultural and ecological elements that are present there, which is exactly what's happening in Florencia. By the way, the same day as that event, there was a huge flood and avalanche that wiped out 80 houses, affecting 240 families in Putumayo because of the intense rainfall. And so this is the pattern. This is the logic. This is how you take early steps to regenerate the entire Amazon. So you can feel how surprising this journey is, right? That the important things come from the place itself, and that the power is in those local stories and those local people, and that these are exactly the people you've never heard of. If you look at regenerative leadership in the world, you'll find none of this. You won't find it at all, which is why narrative strategies and storytelling is absolutely essential to all this work. And that we're starting outside of Brazil. Most people think, oh, the Amazon, that's mostly Brazil. Well, there's a lot happening in Brazil. It's extremely important. But the patterning of regeneration for a watershed, you start at the top, which is in Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Chile, in the Andes. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. I'd love to open it up to questions and comments. Like, is it really possible to regenerate the Amazon? The answer is an absolute yes, theoretically, in principle. Is anyone doing it? Very little. And these are very early days. And by the way, this is the year we're forecast to cross the tipping point of the collapse of the biotic pump of the Amazon system to start it to make a major conversion to grassland, savanna across the continent. So the Amazon rainforest system is collapsing right now as we're doing this work. And I don't think that's an accident. I think there's spiritual significance to that. So, Claire, over to you.
Yeah, oh my gosh, so much there. But what was really standing out to me and just so exciting is to see you describing, I mean, there's so many other things, but this one of the things is describing the land working as a whole system, as an interconnected system that is understanding how it works together. And I'm just wondering, when you shared about bioregionalism, or like, did you share that aspect with people? And if you did, like, because to me, that's where the big aha is that you cannot see it. Like, it's like a system that has a coherence to it. And once you get and see that coherence, which does take some of modern technology for us to have even been able to piece together, see it. But when you shared that, like I'm interested in how powerfully that affected people um, as an organizing part of the landscape. Because to me, I'm just going to put this there because this is where my question's kind of coming from, is to me, it's one of the most powerful pieces of bioregionalism is allowing the land to organize the people. And it takes the emphasis off of the partisanship and the incoherence when you start to pay attention to the land. So, I mean, there was so much in other stuff you shared that I think feeds in, but that's my main question.
Yeah, it's a really important question because in some ways it's a gestalt shift. So it's a paradigm shift. And another way, it's really simple. It's like paradoxically simple. So I would say that the thing that I was asked to do during the day of the event was near the beginning to explain to answer two questions. What is regeneration and how does it lead to a bioregion? And so I just stood up and spoke for about 20 minutes. I didn't use slides, I didn't use pictures. I just talked to them. And what you could really see was they got it. They totally got it. And the thing that they really got was, this makes so much sense. That's what they got. It's like, this makes so much sense. And so throughout the day, I had people coming up to me and just like talking to me about different things, and they could feel the holistic completeness of it, the integral nature of it. And it wasn't a technical understanding like that. Some people, yes, some people no. It was just that they were like, this makes sense. This makes sense. And so I think that because what I did is I talked about regeneration and autopoiesis and what happens with your skin on your arm, how can you understand what it is? And then I said, the whole planet does it. And the hydrological system does it. And that's why the whole Amazon exists. And that's why there's a cloud forest here. And they were like, click, they got it. They knew their local geography really well. So they totally got it. And I didn't talk to them about regenerating the entire Amazon. That wasn't relevant that day. What was relevant to them was to just see how the pattern of regeneration is holistic and it leads to organizing at this larger landscape system scale. And that was what the rest of the day, the way that the day was designed by the facilitators, they facilitated that beautifully, which was the structure of the Northern Andes Fund gave them that. They're like, we'll form a group on regenerative education and you'll brainstorm ideas and a proposal. A regenerative economy will do the same thing. And so they were ready with that bioregional perspective because it had been presented in the morning.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Joe, I just maybe a follow-up to that is just I guess what I am wondering about is like where the sweet spot is in the communication, like the education or the questions that are like being planted for people. Because personally, I tend to sort of want to understand much more deeply, and then I can get people lost in the weeds of, I mean, yeah, of like that aha. And so I suppose it's like, how do we develop toolkits for educating, or it's more than just educating, it's like planting that aha shift that allows them, what you were just saying is they just get it. And so it's like just getting way better at doing that work because I think that that is like so, like to me, that is one of the big acupuncture points in how we're going into landscapes. So.
In a sort of tricky or sneaky way, it's really simple, which is that you connect someone's bodily experience to their existing embeddedness in the larger whole. You're just like, can't you feel that your air came from that forest over there? Can't you feel you're embedded in a larger whole? And have them experience it with their bodies so that their identity becomes interwoven with that story. And they're like, well, of course I depend on that river. It's where our drinking water comes from. And and they feel like connected to their bodies and their sense of who they are, their sense of identity. And so it's an embodied realization that they're already part of that story. Yeah, and there are lots of ways to invoke that, but that's really key. And then it's just a gestalt shift. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Claire. And then Dan, over to you.
Hi, Joe. What an amazing story. And I'm reflecting on the work that we're doing here in California as we endeavor to organize the North Bay, the Sonoma Marin hub, regenerative hub, but as well as the East Bay. So I'm kind of participating in both because the main part of my family, my son and granddaughter, live in East Bay, and I'm still living in North Bay. And I was kind of, we'll be having our second conference or gathering, what they're calling an unconference, because they're using open space technology. I'm not one of the organizers. And they call it the Bay Delta Hub. And for me, I was thinking, well, the Bay Delta Hub is huge. I mean, it includes the whole Central Valley and the western slopes of the Sierra Nevada mountains, as well as the eastern slopes of the coastal mountains. And now that you just shared with us the whole freaking Amazon, it's like, oh, that's small, you know. And so we're having difficulty defining what a bioregion is. And I realize it's very fuzzy, starting from, the snowpack above timberline and all the way down to the convergence of the northern, the western, the eastern, and the southern rivers in the Sacramento Bay Delta. And your story really flipped my brain about starting at the higher levels of the watershed. And we have a group here in Sonoma County, you might know of them, called the Occidental Art and Ecology Center.
They're amazing, yeah.
Yeah, and they just did a big presentation on restoring the beavers throughout not only California, but throughout the world to the extent that they exist. They tried to introduce them in Patagonia, and that failed. Anyway, I'm really heartened. And the word that comes up for me that's used in the Bay Delta Hub is chaotic, which is a word I learned a long time ago when I was studying, complexity theory. But I've been struggling with, polycentric governance. And I think you just showed the way it works. It works literally indigenously and from the original, creeks and streams of our consciousness, but tied to place wherever we are in the watershed. So thank you very much. That's really beautiful. And it gives me a lot of energy to keep organizing.
Hmm.
chaotically.
Yeah, the phrase that David Hankey from the Ozarks uses is eco-holofractal, which is one of those clunky words that you wouldn't use in, most people would know what you mean. But
Right.
and there's a great interview that Bill Bowie did with David recently that's been posted in the design school about eco-holofractals. It's very good because what you discover is, just like you said, your consciousness is multi-scale. It's not just one, it's multiple.
Always.
And one of the key things is to see that, a bioregional lens leads you to some of the things that we've heard in bioregional mapping. You don't divide a watershed.
Right.
Water doesn't divide the watershed. Why would you? And, and that plate tectonics and the geologic patterning that gives rise to those hydrological systems is fundamental. But like I showed with the intertropical convergence zone, you actually find there's a larger scale still, and the planetary scale. And of course, you got to the solar system scale. Thank goodness Jupiter exists, or else meteors would have wiped out the world ocean and, all that stuff. But basically, it is nested realities all the way to the universe. But what matters to us is that the ecological scale of holistic organizing, which is the bioregion, is a natural self-organizing pattern of living systems within the dynamics of a planet, which is why once you understand the planet's way of working, you arrive at bioregions, not the other way around.
And I would say our planet, because there's a whole, I don't want to call them a cabal, but I just learned the name that some people are giving it, and there's a newsletter called the Nerd Reich, where they're planning to ascend into silicon-based life forms, and therefore, going to Mars, which has no life that we know of. Maybe it did at one time when it was liquid water, but why would you want to do that?
Yeah,
and we're going the other direction into the planet.
They might want to understand that the 200-year spree of petroleum was 200 million years of captured sunlight. Right. And when that runs out, where does your energy supply come from if you can't get nuclear fusion? Nuclear fusion is the only thing that could produce the energy. And by the way, we already have that. It's called a star.
Yeah. And why would you bring that into the biosphere, right?
So
it already is our sun.
We're already using it. Yeah. Thank you, sun, the star, our sun, for giving us nuclear fusion.
Yeah.
By the way, with zero toxic byproducts. And so, and it's very far away, so we're pretty safe, and don't put it in Nevada where you're gonna dump your toxic waste or whatever. So anyway, yeah, to be continued on that conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan. And Marisa, thank you for your patience. Over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this conversation. Thank you so much. And Dan, I'm thinking about putting together a California call, to share some resources. So you guys will be hearing from me. I'm in San Luis Obispo. Yeah.
Okay.
So my question was really, talking about the fractal nature and the nested scales. And I just wondered if Penny could talk at all, if she was open to it, about some of those healing conversations that she had on the trip. Because there's no ecosystem health regeneration without the health, and I just wondered if you could talk about it. Thanks.
It's a big deal. So yes.
Yeah, that's what I want to know about. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess what I would say about that is there's a feeling of in some ways like desperation for that kind of healing because of the violence and the trauma. Like what the woman that I was talking to in that picture, her dad left before she was born, this kind of thing. And she was like, she right now do a session, she was so ready for something. And also just even with those women, not the women looking for their lost children, but the other group of women, near the end of that presentation, they were so excited about learning about the trauma. They're like, come back and do a workshop. It's sort of this come back next week. I mean, really, they were so ready for, and they were really, really open to just they, basically what I said in terrible Spanish, because I'm terrible, is that the healing is at the center of all of this, right? It's at the core of all the regeneration work. And they were like, yeah, and they all know, and they're all ready for that work. And that's what, yeah, it just, overall, it just feels like this energy of the healing and the feminine energy, the yin energy is rising in this moment in so many different ways. And it's just becoming clear to a lot of women here in Bhatichara, to myself, that this is what, like, we have to bring this forward. And that's our call right now. I'm really feeling it in myself, and that balance between the feminine and the masculine is what's being called for now. And it's strong everywhere I'm going, everywhere we're going. So yeah, that's
Same
what
here. Yeah.
Mm.
Thank you.
And I'll just add a comment that the place we went before Florencia was the Caribbean, to the ocean, where a beautiful reef system was basically dead through the bleaching processes that happen on the reef systems. And for us to connect with the ocean, which is the great feminine, the great bringer of life for the whole planet, is the ocean, that we felt that connection of ocean and mountain just on the travel we did. And because Colombia has such great ocean and such great mountain, you can have these really deep connections that I think the element of water is so profoundly connected to what Penny was just saying. So I wanted to add that as well. Yeah, no, thanks for the question, and for Penny for sharing. If you have more sharing, let me know.
Yeah.
She's sort of enjoying quietly being on the side right now. Steve, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Wow. I'm just in awe of your capacity to embrace this topic at such breadth and complexity, embrace the complexity while embracing this huge scope. It's really inspirational. So there's a whole lot that I would like to comment on, but I'll try and boil it down to one question that's rooted in the. I love the examples you gave of, one being the pervasiveness of addiction and the spiritual responses to it, and the other being the example of the women looking for lost boys and lost men, and how deeply ingrained that is, right? Those are both, and you, as you pointed out, that just, they both illustrate the critical importance of storytelling in order to inform your regenerative efforts with cultural awareness. Like if you were ignorant of those stories, then any attempts to inject sort of we've got the answer, you're completely unable to meet them where they are, right? So you can't establish that connection. It's it's going to be the colonial approach otherwise, right? Because you just come in with the answer ignorant of the local context. So I just love that you illustrated that and embody it so much. My question is, can you connect a few of the dots and sort of say, how can the sense of your awareness, say, of those sort of cultural realities, how can you weave that into the work of regeneration, maybe in some practical sense, if you can?
Well, I'll start with a couple of little photos I have from the woman who set up that school with kids. I'll show you this one photo right here. That's on my phone, so you can see it. See, there are plastic bottles that were thrown into the trash. The kids collected them, and they're making a garden.
Or in the river.
Oh, they were in the river, and the kids collected them, and they're creating a garden. Now, without one of these women who is healing in herself enough to feel her emotions and to care for children and to come forth and inspire and support those children, those kids could say whatever they wanted to their crack mom who was passed out on the couch, right? That is a place of extreme poverty where that photo is taken, and where drug addiction and violence are ever present. So without a woman being able to connect into her own body and come into that caregiver role, the archetypal mother role with those kids never would have been supported to go and do something like that. And I think the way I'll explain it is a conversation I had in Barichara yesterday. Because in Sueños del Bosque, in our school, that's becoming a learning ecosystem. So we're starting to diversify our elements of what we're doing. One of the things is we have a woman on our team named Milena. She's amazing. And Milena is a teacher of teachers. She's a teacher trainer who knows a lot about pedagogy and community education. And she's developing a program right now. So she sat down and we talked about it yesterday. And she's naming it Cuida la Vida, which is care for life, because she knows there are some legal changes in Colombia that are going to require public schools to do social and emotional well-being and mental health in the schools. And so she's developing a program for that she knows Ministry of Education funding will support. So she could pilot a program and then later get funding to put in the schools. And the focus for her is basically exactly what Penny's doing right now in the inner space. Like Penny has done some recent sessions in the inner space about the window of presence and the ability of you as a body to come into your awareness without some trauma trigger taking you out of your present moment, where you're worrying about the past or worrying about the future and you're not in the present moment, the mindfulness of the present, where you can sense in and connect and act with purpose. That little place right there is where this woman is when she's bringing the kids to collect those bottles from the river. And so there's something really important about teaching teachers or teaching community leaders how to bring others into body connection, to connect with their own body, their own feelings, their own awareness, and then from there to sense what's happening around them and cultivate a conscientious response. And it's in that place that all of this gets very practical and very real. And it's in that place that most of the regenerative work never manifests, never materializes, because something else is happening there. And so that's why Penny said that healing process is right in the middle of it. It's experientially right in the middle of it. And so, but what happens when you connect to that? You discover things you had when you were in the shock state, you didn't know were there. Beauty, innocence, joy, some of the most healing emotions our bodies can produce. When Penny and I were in the coral reef, we're like swimming in a graveyard. We could have wept. We could have drowned ourselves in despair, literally, because we're in the ocean. But we couldn't. You know why? There was this adorable little 8-year-old named Elise laughing and giggling about how pretty the 30 fish were. There should have been, 10 million fish. There were 30. She still thought they were beautiful because she's an innocent 8-year-old. And we were resourced by the innocence of the child. We were resourced by her laughing and giggling as she was learning how to snorkel. And so we could hold both this profound grief and this surprising purity and innocence by staying within that window of presence that Penny's talking about in the inner space. And so it's that realm is where the integration can occur. And that integration is regeneration. So yeah, I hope that's clear enough, because I know you know a lot about the inner work, but that's where spirituality is expressed, and that's where it's found as well.
Yeah, that's beautiful, beautiful answer. That's really, yeah, you nailed it. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Do you want to add anything to that, Penny? Or are you good?
That was good.
Penny feels like I've graduated from inner space class. Okay, that one, not other ones. All right, Carlos, over to you.
Well, you've got a good teacher, Joe. So.
True that.
Thank you so much. I think my question has been essentially answered, but I just want to underline, I'm from that region, so Huila is right next to Caqueta, so I have tons of stories about
Huila,
the whole history. And Pitalito, which is right essentially next to it. So I still have family members in Caqueta, and yeah, so just wanted to say your bravery and commitment. It's just impressive. Something you said to me in the group last time I asked the question was about the third way of seeing, which is this not all just numbers and measurement, and not all just in the moment being present, right? But we can, there's a third way. That was the, and I was looking into that, and tying it back to education, which was already mentioned, and you gave some excellent examples. But I'm curious if you see almost like an optimal balance for offering different on-ramps for people, because some people are more drawn towards the arts, some people are more drawn towards the facts or the history or the community. So I feel like all of them are important and there's no silver bullet, but I'm curious if you've seen some success starting with a certain way, and especially in things like this that is a little bit more remote. So it's not so relevant what the need is. But I feel that in my community or the ESG consulting world, I feel that I'm having conversations of a lot of people that already feel this angst of, okay, we've been doing this for decades. It's not going anywhere. Emissions keep increasing. Like all the wrong indicators are still going up. And I feel that I'm going through my own process. So just to be frank, I'm also not in the best time of my life. Got a lot of big decisions right now with my family. So just being open about that. But I feel that I want to offer something that kind of takes all these hooks and in a regenerative way. So all of that kind of wanted to summarize into what is your definition of regenerative education? Yeah, and if there's any little insight into this remote setting and some of those on-ramps.
If I was to say what is regenerative education in like a phrase or a sentence, I would say it's learning how to come into right relationship with life. And right relationship with life is ethical. There's conscience, there's conscientiousness, conciencia, and this is really important. So I would say regenerative education is whatever brings us into right relationship with life. So that's very general, meaning it can mean different things, and that's important. It should mean different things. But let's take a child and give two examples. There's a 3-year-old child, a single mother, the father's gone, we don't know where he is. And the mother is overwhelmed, so she gives her child a phone or a tablet, and the kid is just like disconnected in whatever is on that screen, right? There is no way to come into right relationship with life. There's not. Just in that context, they are pulled away. The mother is pulled away by her stress and overwhelm. The kid's pulled away by all these energetic distractions and psychological hijacks and whatever that is, it's all happening. Contrast that with, like the example of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, the person who created Buddhism. He sat for 40 days under the Bodhi tree. He went and sat under a tree, and it was like the tree right there. He sat next to a living being. So just take the idea that regenerative education is putting yourself in a relational pattern to connect with life around you. So sitting under a tree, looking at a flower, watching a river, feeling the wind on your cheek, interacting with animals. So maybe you have a pet dog, even if you live in a city, the dog is still life. And so, or with another human being. And so there are so many ways in, but the important thing is to come into this aware, alive connection with life. And so I think that's the big thing. And the conscience comes from that. You become responsible to what you're in relationship with. And so one of the biggest things is that. So as we're doing regenerative education here in Barichara, which is taking many different forms, for the kids, it's cultivate the connection to the living context around them through art, through movement, through emotion, through music, through play. But it's, as we'd say in Spanish, aula viva, living classrooms, right? Living classrooms. They're not inside of a box, which is why that Catholic industrial, the model of Colombian education. That's why it doesn't work. That thing doesn't work. The Maloka, as you know, the Casa de Pensamientos, those spiritual houses, they have the architecture of the community inside the space that reflects the territory. So even when you're inside, you're connected to the territory. And so there's so much we can learn. See, the layers and layers, it becomes very rich. But it's how do we come into right relationship with life? And there are so many answers to that question that it's a lot of things. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joe. I think it's liberating. It's like giving permission to everything is welcome. Essentially, people are gonna be drawn to it if it's in right relationship with life.
Yeah.
Thank you, Joe.
So just invite them to feel it, to be present, to notice, and to feel. And then from there, you go where it goes, and it'll go many places. Y qué bien que eres de Huila. Just to the north of the people of Florencia. Qué bien. Bueno. So, over
Muchas
to
gracias.
Gracias a ti. Is it Maganel, or how do you pronounce your name?
Maganel.
Maganel, lovely. Welcome, please.
Thank you. It's really hard to speak, but I just had to. I'm very new here, but I'm really so moved, and really want to. I'm moved and want to say moved by it. It doesn't look like any of the things we've been taught it could look like, and I'm so grateful for that. And I wanted to say thank you to Penny, because when she spoke about the feminine, the women rising in the waters, there's just something I feel a very strong and deep call in relation to this. And I don't have a strong sense of belonging to a place right now, and that's okay. And I don't have a clue what this is supposed to look like, but you've blown it all open for me, and I'm shaking, so I'll just say thank you so much.
Well, as you know, being broken open is a deep process of healing.
Yes. Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Thank you. Thank you for
Thank
sharing.
you for showing us what's possible.
And happening. And is happening. So important. So important. Hunter, over to you.
Hey, thanks, Joe. I tried to formulate my thoughts into a coherent question and I failed, but I'll share at least what I got. And any reflections would be welcome. And I think maybe Penny, sorry to say that maybe you'd provided reflections here more so than Joe, but in the context of regeneration and education, you just mentioned Buddhism and being in right relations with life. I often find in response to my human to human engagements in just the wider context of trying to do this work, that there's like I just had a meeting right before this one, a strong appreciation for like that was so real. It was so simultaneously like disheartening, but also like the work is happening. I'm seeing that in what you're doing. So like it's horrible, but you're also saying it's real and then responding to what's real. And there's this whole half of engagement that I get. And then there's the entire other half, which is you pointing at me, you are cold and prickly. And for me, that reflects very much this idea in Buddhist practice of aversion, which is my conscious mind does not accept this. I see this as creating bad sensations on my body. And as opposed to sitting with those and being aware of our body sensations, we project out onto the other person and blame them for the creation of those things. And of course, there's clearly this importance of inner work that stems from this, and the cultural context that I exist in tends to primarily associate the work in that space with, or I should say, there's not a coherent like working in that space. There's a lot of language and nice, curtain dressings and things, but ultimately there's a lot of people who get fingers pointed at them saying, you don't work well with others. When I see those people working throughout the community very effectively with others quite regularly, it's just they happen to have they're too real for some of these conversations and too largely depressing. So as I said, I tried to formulate a question out of this, and I really don't have a coherent question, but for me, this leaves me just in a space of, I literally have experienced these two dichotomies yesterday and this morning. And it's continuous, and I'm sure a lot of people in this space who hold this deep knowledge and engage with it and are doing something about it probably experience this as well. And people stepping into this space are going to experience that. So I'll just leave it with that. Thank you.
I'll just say that I happen to be very lucky that I was raised in the culture of the Ozarks. Without knowing that that was happening, you know, I grew up in Southwest Missouri, and in the Ozarks, I learned how to be just what you said, which is why there is a whole group of people in the regenerative leadership space who for years are actively, and still to this day, actively trying to destroy me and everything I do, so that the regenerative movement can be protected from me, because I'm actually real. And sometimes being real isn't pretty. And there's something about being able to just be pragmatic and real that is actually very important in this. And so to be able to say, I don't know the answer, to be able to say it's something different than I thought, is to be able to say, well, you know, you have to go into that pain before you can get to the healing on the other side. And that's actually a big part of why we haven't regenerated the earth. You know, when I came upon the name Earth Regenerators, and I did a little frame analysis just for looking at it, like, why had no one named Earth Regenerators before me? Is it because I'm this brilliant, you know, designer of logos? No. It's because to even accept the possibility of the existence of being an Earth Regenerator, we have to look through the heart of our ugliness as humanity and find something redeeming. Say, for all the damage we're doing to the planet still deserves to have us, which means we have to love ourselves. And the exact reason why people were not naming something like Earth Regenerators back in the 1970s or 1980s or 1990s is because there's so much cultural trauma about humans as the pestilence, as the disease, as the virus that the earth is shaking off, which is a form of self-hatred born from abuse. It's born from abuse. There's a woman that I'm working with in the Movement of Territorial Foundations that I helped bring her into a healing space in Bodhicitta. And she had been sexually abused as a child. And she went through a healing process, and she discovered in her own healing process, she couldn't accept the reality of regeneration because she couldn't let herself be loved because of what had happened to her when she was sexually assaulted before the age of 6. And so for me to hear that and go, oh, that is ugly, but it's also true. It's also true. And so we have to see why we're not regenerating the earth. And sometimes we have to look in really dark places to see it. And that's why people are afraid of the truth of this story. They're psychologically afraid. And so yeah, what Penny's been talking about is hugely important, because it's exactly why we don't go into presence. How could Penny and I float around in that graveyard of coral reef and still laugh? It's not because we're laughing at death in a cynical way. It's because my daughter's innocence was so beautifully healing that we could let ourselves love, notice the death, and notice that my daughter is still beautiful. The one didn't negate the other. We had to let ourselves feel love. And so that's a lot of inner work to do that. And that's why there aren't more people. That's why we don't have this huge, millions of people strong Earth Regenerators movement. And people keep looking for gadgets and technologies, numbers, and the whole ESG thing, Carlos, the numbers, something outside of ourselves is because what we have to heal is inside of ourselves. We're the ones who are going to go extinct as the humans. We're just taking a bunch of other stuff down with us. And so that's why that part that you're describing is so important. So important. Is the beauty is in seeing the ugly and seeing it's beautiful anyway. but at a deeper level. And that's something Penny and I we on a daily basis, we struggle with. Every one of us does that's open to this. We struggle with this, and we need to be talking about it. So I'm really glad you brought it in.
Just got to say thank you for the reflection. And I talk about this with my partner a lot as well. And you use the word cynicism, and I guess for just me, I'll earmark. It's one of the things where I so often I'm saying this out loud, and then I look at my husband, I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm being cynical, but I just need to vent for a moment. So I can even see where the thought's leading me. Where is the ugliness that I'm self-identifying or seeing outwards, and how can this inform the present moment? So yeah, appreciate it.
Yep. Onward, inward, and upward. Do you want to add anything there or no? No, okay. Okay, Magdalena, over to you.
Thank you. This is just a very banal observation, but this is a beautiful session, Joe and Penny, thank you. In the inner session, it's mainly women. And today in the financial lab, it's mainly men. And how funny it is. And if they only knew. So I think your suggestion of changing the name, because this is very deep. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm going to just go back into general. There are only a few of us left because several people stepped away as we got to the end of the time. But I just want to say, like I said at the beginning, I wanted to show you the pattern, because I wanted you to see that there is a logic. There is a way of doing this. Actually, there's a chapter in my book called How to Regenerate the Amazon River. And I described what we're actually doing now. And, you go watershed by watershed in parallel in a chaotic or a translocal, multiple locations simultaneously sort of a way. But in every one of those places, you start at the high ground and work your way down. And what's ironic or paradoxical is when you go to the high ground, you find you have to go to the depths. And we really experienced that in the story of Florencia and Caquetá. The depths are profound. They're profound. What is in these places is profound. And it's not where you would expect to look. But we need to start looking to where ecology guides us, and ecology guides us to the tops of the watersheds. In Spanish, the birthplace of a river is called nacimiento, birthplace, nacimiento del agua. And I like the phrase in English, sacred headwaters, which I don't think I have a direct correlation in Spanish, but I'm starting to try and practice, how do I explain what sacred headwaters is with the language of nacimiento? And they're very much connected. So I'm exploring that across culture and language. Just how do I bring a story of the sacred headwaters? Because in the Northern Andes, the sacred headwaters are called Paramo. And they're very unusual ecosystems that only exist in the Northern Andes, nowhere else on Earth. There are 30 of them. 28 of them are in Colombia. And they are these high elevation wetlands that if you saw them, they look like desert plants, but they do sublimation. Basically, they're high enough elevation that frozen water turns into liquid on the surface of these very unusual trees. And they form high elevation wetlands to birth all the rivers in the Northern Andes, except Florencia, where they have the lowest elevation cloud forest on Earth. And which is very interesting, that most of the waters are born in the Northern Andes from the Paramos. And in Florencia, some of them are Paramos, but then you have this cloud forest, and it doesn't get high enough for there to be sublimation. You don't have frozen vapor, frozen water. And so what does that even mean, that frozen water births the Magdalena River or the Caquetá River? What does that even mean? Frozen water evaporated from the Pacific births the Amazon. And most people have no idea that that's the truth. So the surprises are what we discover when we go and look. Today we went and looked, where would we go to regenerate the Amazon River? We would go to Narco Trafficker Central of Colombia. Would you have known to look there? But there we are. And there is a spiritual depth to the people there that you cannot imagine until you go there. By the way, Putumayo is the same. Huila is the same. These are places with incredible depth of indigenous knowledge. These are the places where the field of ethnobotany was invented, was anthropologists coming to these regions and discovering these plant practices from these regions. By the way, it's the same in Ecuador. You'll find the same thing there, same spiritual depths. And so it's not claiming Colombia. Colombia is an artifact of colonialism, but these landscapes have this, and it's very real and it's very profound. So I'm really glad to be able to share with you our journey into regenerating the Amazon, and that we're strange actors. You know, Penny's from the Rocky Mountains and I'm from the Ozarks Plateau. And here we are collaborating with these beautiful human beings in Caqueta and in Putumayo. We're going to Putumayo soon. And so just to say, we'll be sharing more of this journey, and that we want to regenerate these large scale systems. So we want you to help. Let's find ways to do this together. So thank you for being here today, and onward, fellow humans. We'll talk to y'all soon.